shop. Today is Diane Isherwood. Thank you, Diane. And also we've got Jonathan Park, who's assisting with the reception. Finally, a special thanks goes to our staff members, Vanessa Black, our gallery assistant, who's taking photographs, and to Marina Vandenberg, standing by Alan. In the last few days since we opened the show, since Wednesday, we've been so delighted to see how long people spend in Ross's exhibition. Being a sort of tourist destination here in Deep Cove, we have lots of lovely people who come in, having gone for a hike or gone for a kayak, and who come in and have a look at the shop and have a look at the exhibition, and who may spend a few minutes, may spend a long time looking at the art that we have on display. Every single person who walks through the gallery doors and looks at Ross's work stays for a really long time. There's something very magical about these photographs, something very engaging about them. You know, it might be that we haven't listed locations because that gets people thinking about where they might stand on Main and Hastings Street. But it really is the series of photographs which I think are very zeitgeisty and really capture a lot of what we as Greater Vancouverites are thinking about in terms of the future of our city. And I think that Ross is really to be congratulated, not only because of the documentary nature of this project, but because you're able to capture this particular interest of people who live in the area and people who are visiting the area. It's an exhibition that's got a lot of people very excited, and we're just thrilled to be able to host that here at the Seymour Gallery. We work very hard to host exhibitions that start conversations, and Ross's exhibition has started conversations. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Ross, who's going to speak for a few minutes about this.
I think it was the glue that I spread on the floor on Wednesday. It made it a little harder for people to walk. Thanks for coming out, everybody. This is a project that I started a few years ago. Started thinking about it just after the Olympics, and I was standing at Harbour Center, staring at that building there. And the reason that I'm actually going to point this one out first is it was the second one that I did. Actually, there were two that I did on the same day. The building that Opus is in the Dominion building down on Hastings, and then this one, which is a 500 block of West Hastings. And when I moved to Vancouver 25 years ago, I started working in a little photo lab that was in what used to be a wash pit of Umberto's restaurant that had closed. And so I've been somewhat connected to either Main Street or Hastings Street for the 25 years that I've lived here. It's longer than that now, isn't it? 26 years? Okay, so much longer. And a year. To either Main Street or Hastings. So I've been involved with that location for a really long time. When I started at the photo lab, that building was a disused bank. It had been left vacant, and I was talking with a friend about a project he was working on, and as he left, I noted how different that block had become over the years that I've been here. And I thought, you know, I probably should make some photos of things that are changing or going to change, and not from any perspective of, it wasn't a political perspective at all. It really was just an observation that neighborhoods evolve, neighborhoods change, and sometimes we lose sight and we lose track and we forget what was there before. So that's where the series came from. When I moved to Vancouver, the expo lands were more or less vacant. Expo was over, but I don't remember the buildings that were standing there, and now it's quite different. So it's somewhat the same mentality. I've noted a lot of the buildings that I've shot in the series have changed over the course of the project, which in the last 2 years we've had great many things change. The Crates building that's behind Mike and the one over there, that's a presentation center now for a condo development. It's painted white. This morning as I was driving here, I thought I'd better take a photo of that because that's different. So I can't see this project stopping at all. Yeah, no, I can't. No.
That would be like you stopping and taking photographs.
You should have talked to me yesterday. Yesterday, I spent the day trying to build a website, and I know that it's not something I have any skill in. I figured that out. So, yeah, yesterday I felt very much like that. This one over here, used to be it is still, it used to be a car lot, and that was one of the most recent photos. That one and the 200 block, I'm not going to say where it is actually. That's somewhere on Main Street, and that's the beauty actually of the way that Hillary put the show together, was that we had this collaboration. I created the work, but she chose not to actually identify any of the locations, and that's something that I thought made the show even more interesting, because now it's somewhat of a treasure hunt. But anyway, this one over here, I liked, when I took the photo, I wasn't sure whether I was actually going to include it. At the time, I didn't really think that it should go in, but then I realized that there's some really little details in here that made the photo interesting. There's a woman that's staring at the lot, at the development permit application. There's a sign on the fence that's talking about how they have to do the site remediation, remove whatever toxic stuff is on there. So we wind up touching the ground in a lot of different ways, and sometimes we have to clean up the marks that we left before, and I think that one somewhat sums up the show in many ways, along with this one over here. So this one over here, I was driving downtown. Actually, no, I don't drive. Shulta does most of the driving. My wife does most of the driving. Her eyesight's not as good as mine. So I can see the traffic signs. This one was a marquee that says all it was, will always have been, somehow never again. That kind of summed up this series. And then they took that marquee down, so that's changed now too. So I managed to get a photo of that one before that marquee changed. I live in a house in Strathcona that's not far, as I mentioned, from Hastings Street, not really that far from Main Street. And its bones are 100 plus years old, but it's got a new roof, it's got new plumbing, it's got new siding, it's had many owners over the course of those years that house has stood. So it's stood mostly through periodic interventions. And neighborhoods are the same way. I think if they fall into disuse, they need to be reinvigorated, repaired, reimagined. And I don't necessarily think that it's a bad thing in any way. So this series really is about remembering what's there today, but it's not really about what's going to be there in the future. I had no presence of mind to present the show in that way, which was part of the reason why I was happy to put it out in Deep Cove, where it's outside of the geographic location, removed from any of the discussions about gentrification or any of that. It really is about the content of the work when we do it in a gallery that's removed from the location of the photos. So. But the other thing about the photos is I took them with a purpose. Everyone's going to look at them through a different set of eyes, through a different set of experiences, and how I feel about the photos isn't necessarily in a way to, how I present the photo, I'm not doing it in a way to influence how you as viewers see them. So that's my position on the photos, but it doesn't have to be everyone else's position on the photos. Everyone has their own opinions about them, and they should make people feel a certain way, but it doesn't have to be the way that I feel about them. So I'm really encouraging a dialogue and a conversation, and I think if anyone has any questions about them, to fire along and ask. The photos, as I said, they were done over the course of a few years, and they appear to be a simple photograph just of a scene, but they're done technically in a series of photos that are put together in a way that allows for a couple of things. Much higher resolution, so I can resolve greater detail in photos, and it allowed me to play with time a little bit. I chose to exclude cars and people for the most part, so it's scenes that we don't see as we're driving through life, as we're driving along a path. We don't normally see these areas for your vehicles, and by taking the photos the way that I did, it allowed me to stretch time out a little bit and create a photograph that had fewer distractions in it. So the photos were taken with a camera, and then the camera was rotated, and then the photos were placed together to allow me to play with the composition, exclude things that would distract from the facades of the buildings, and to put the people where I wanted them to be. So I got to manipulate things a little bit by doing so.
A lot of people are always interested in why the Vancouver Club is in there. If they identify that as the Vancouver Club,
Right.
that's everybody's reference just over there.
You just take away the location, it's so much more. Because when we hear the words made of Hastings, we're given a very particular kind of image to what that is. We look at it as an intersection. And what I wanted to show was the contrasts that extend along that corridor of Hastings Street. We've got this facade provides a great deal of contrast to this facade, both on Hastings Street. And it's a street that has so much to it. Auto body shops down very far into this of Hastings Street in Vancouver. I mean, Hastings runs much further than this series actually carries on. But the Vancouver Club I wanted to include because it provided somewhat of an anchor. I don't really see that building changing. That's probably one of the ones that will stay constant in the series. That building, I don't think I'll need to go back and photograph again, because I think that 40 years from now, it will probably still look an awful lot like that one. So that just saved me a bit of work. This one, I already know I have to take that photo. Go Ballet, which is over there. They've changed their awnings. And the Fox Theater that screens a particular genre of film for the longest time is now a nightclub. So I have to photograph that one again. So, as I said, sorry?
You told me passed on project.
I know, exactly. So I can't stop that. I'm quite involved.
Are there any other streetscapes or neighborhoods you're interested in?
Well, I had a friend who asked me if I'd photograph a particular building on Fraser Street, and that building's gone now.
Oh.
So I can't do that. Can't do that walk till it becomes more interesting again in the future, I guess. But yeah, there's a spin-off project that I'm working on that actually has a lot to do with that shop there, the development permit sign. So the next series that I'm planning on doing is photos of this development and rezoning application signs for the buildings that are in behind it. And that's the spin-off project from this series. So it's not necessarily geographically specific. So yeah, that's kind of, yeah, I'm gonna take it in a different way. I might shoot that on Polaroid, actually. So, because that way I can frame small prints. Big prints.
Ross, one of the things that I find quite interesting was very few people stopped you and asked you what you were doing.
Right. I had very little conversation with people while I was standing doing the series. Mostly because I was doing it in the morning when no one was really walking around. I had the Funkies and Seymour meets. This was sort of the only place that someone actually stopped and chatted with me for a while. Asked what I was doing, and I told him that I was photographing the buildings before they changed too much. And as he was cycling away on his bike with things he found from the dumpster, he said, yeah, buildings always change. So it was, that was the one sort of contact I had with somebody, except there was another a little further down Hastings where somebody felt that I was taking their photo, and I was actually taking a photo of the building. So I had to go through and scroll through the camera and show that he wasn't actually in the photos. So I did kind of consciously try to exclude people and cars so that there were fewer ways to identify when the photos were taken. So you're forced to sort of see the buildings, but not necessarily know when they were done.
And they mostly shot in the early mornings or with cars?
Yes, exactly, yeah. So some of the buildings, I had to sort of work around Mother Nature. I have very few photos of the buildings that face north along Hastings Street because the parking regulations didn't coincide with when the sun hit. In fact, the sun really never seemed to hit the north side of Hastings Street at all. So I don't think I have any of the north side of Hastings. A lot of the south side, the parking restrictions sort of restrict traffic heading into downtown. So that's why a lot of the south side of Hastings is represented in the show. So yeah, it was early morning, and it had somewhat of an effect on the photos that made them appear somewhat lonely, because the buildings aren't open yet. The shops aren't open, there aren't any people, and that wasn't really the intent, but that's the way that everything somewhat worked out in the end. So